Welcome to our Unit 3 Zoom meeting. In today's meeting, we'll talk about our Unit 3 assignment, which includes a professional written proposal and a supporting PowerPoint, and you'll also be presenting that PowerPoint via Zoom to a small group of classmates. Let's get started by talking about the purpose of a proposal. Most of the time, a professional proposal seeks to do one of a few things: identify an issue or a problem, pitch a new idea, or suggest change. In order to get started, we'll follow these steps. Identify an issue at work, on campus, or in the community. The issue that you're identifying should be real and actually exist. Next, you'll think of an original idea that could resolve, improve, or simplify the issue. Your topic must be approved, so make sure that you submit your topic approval on time. Your reader must be a real person. First and foremost, you are not writing to a large group of people as your audience. You are writing to one person who is your real reader. Depending on the problem that you've identified, this reader could be your boss at work. It could be someone who has some power within the university to make a change. But at the end of the day, your reader has to be the person who can really make your idea happen. In this particular assignment, you yourself are the writer. In our Unit 1 and Unit 2 assignments, you are playing a role either as the director of operations or as a supervisor or as the owner of a small social media consulting firm. But in this case, you really truly are writing from your own perspective as you are. Remember your audience, and we've talked about this in each of our assignments. In this case, your audience and your relationship to them is going to define a lot of different things. That includes your tone and your word choice. So if you're writing to your direct boss who you've worked for several years, your tone might be a little bit more casual and approachable than if you're writing to the Chancellor of Academic Affairs, whom you've never met, or if you're writing to the mayor of your city. The level of detail that you need to include is also relevant to who your audience is. If you're writing, once again, to your boss and they're very familiar with the problem that you've identified, you don't need to go into as much detail as you might if you're writing to the Chancellor of Academic Affairs, who maybe isn't intimately familiar with problems that students experience. The organization of ideas is also dependent on your audience. Remember, you really want to appeal to your reader right out of the gate in a proposal like this, because you want to gain their interest so that they keep reading. So think about who your reader is and what they care about the most, and you want to start your paper by presenting the idea that they care about the most first. The level of persuasion needed is also relevant to your relationship with the audience and who the audience is. If you suspect that your reader might already be thinking along the same lines as you and that they'll be agreeable to what you're suggesting, you don't need to rely on persuasion as heavily as you would if you think your reader is resistant to the idea that you are suggesting. So let's break down the components of this proposal. These are the headings that I suggest you use to guide your organization. So the first paragraph is typically going to state your purpose, and you can use purpose if you'd like as a generic heading. Most of your headings should be more descriptive than that, but right out the gate, purpose is okay. This initial paragraph is going to orient the reader to what it is that you're presenting. So your purpose here, and this is the same for everyone in the class, is that you are solving a problem by delivering a solution. So by the time your reader finishes that first paragraph, they should understand that your entire purpose is to identify and explain this problem and then present them with a solution. One of the common mistakes that I see is that the opening paragraph simply goes on and on about the problem so that the reader would just think it's going to be a couple of pages of complaining and not have any idea that the whole purpose is to provide a solution. One thing to also be careful about is that you don't want to give everything away right in the first paragraph. I think sometimes when you're writing and you're trying to hint at what your overall purpose is, it can become really easy to go into way too much detail. And then all of a sudden you found that you've got 5 opening paragraphs and nothing left to support the memo with. So keep your opening concise and to the point, hint at what's to come, but don't go into detail until you get into the body of the paper. The next section is going to be your problem. So, of course, your heading should be more detailed than the word problem. It should be a descriptive statement about what your problem is. And in this section, you're going to provide a detailed explanation about why your idea is needed. Essentially, you're going to describe the problem and provide examples of that problem occurring. Ideally, you have real examples that are going to discuss actual things that have happened that are true. If you don't have an actual example, you can make up a hypothetical one in order to demonstrate the problem. The next section, well, I guess I should back up. Your problem section might be 2 paragraphs, it might be 7 paragraphs. It really just depends on how complex your problem is, how many examples you have, and how much detail you need to go into in order to help your reader understand what the problem is. The solution is your next section, and again, you should be using a detailed heading to describe what your solution is. You're going to describe your original idea. So whatever your idea does, how it works, why it solves the problem, you want to go into a lot of detail here so that it's very clear to your reader exactly why your idea is good and how they could benefit from it. So when we talk about the benefits of your solution, usually there's a couple of different layers to it. Obviously, your solution solves the problem that you've described, but it's also important to point out to your reader how your solution benefits them. So, in the example of identifying a problem at school and writing to the Chancellor of Academic Affairs, you naturally, if you're talking about a problem that's related to students, you're going to talk about how your idea solves that problem and improves it from the student perspective. Your reader wants to know how they benefit from it as well. So you have to make sure that you kind of strip down all the different levels of benefits that are going to happen because of your idea and explain those thoroughly. You also want to include a timeline for development. So if the idea that you are suggesting could be initiated very quickly and put in place, within a matter of a week or two, that's great and you want to share that. On the other hand, let's say you're suggesting the development and rollout of some type of app that students can use on their phones to make, I don't know, scheduling easier or something along those lines. It might take several months in order to find a company or a group that can develop the app and then get the app going and then maybe run a test of the app and then finally to actually market the app to students. So that might take, 60 to 90 days. It's okay if you're just kind of hypothesizing what the timeline might be. I'm not necessarily expecting that you'll be able to contact a software company or a coding company in order to find out how long it would take to actually develop an app. But for our purposes, it's important that you demonstrate that you have considered the timeline. So come up with whatever seems realistic and include that within your paper. It's also really good to include the cost of whatever your solution is, and everything has a cost. Your idea might not actually cost money, but if it doesn't, it most certainly will cost someone's time. So make sure that you're pointing out the costs that are involved in whatever you're suggesting. If your idea does cost money and you suspect that that might be a problem, you need to come up with some reasons, or I'm sorry, you need to come up with some ways to raise that money. Otherwise, your reader might not be likely to want to follow along with your plan. Okay, so moving on to the conclusion. This is a really key part of your proposal because it's the last thing that your reader's going to read. Therefore, it's what they're going to remember. So you have to be really persuasive in the conclusion, and you also need to highlight the most important points. And then finally, you want your conclusion to be future oriented, meaning that you want to tell your reader how things are going to improve if they do accept and move forward with your solution. You can and should use subheadings within your problem and solution sections. So let's talk about persuasive writing techniques. Since everybody's proposal needs to be persuasive, some probably to a higher extent than others, but just overall, a proposal is always going to rely on some element of persuasion. We're going to go through the 10 main persuasive writing techniques. Everybody's already familiar with using persuasion, and that's because we learn how to do it as children and then we get better at it as we grow older. So, a couple of examples here. When we're kids, we start maybe trying to persuade our parents to get things that we want. So if I can have this cookie now, I promise that I'll eat all my dinner later. So kind of some logic and reasoning at play here in order to convince our parent and to give us what it is we want. We are offering them something that they want, right? So this is a method of persuasion. As we get older, maybe as teenagers, we get a little bit better at this idea of persuasion and using logic, but also an appeal to emotion. So maybe as a teen, we might say something like, I really need to drive a big truck like a Ford F-150 to keep me safe on the roads, right? So this is both logical and it's also reminding our parents how much they love us and that they want us to be safe. Again, appealing to the sense of pathos and logos. Then, as we become adults, we actually become experts at persuasion, and we use it at work quite a bit. So we might argue to our boss that we deserve a raise because of our strong work ethic and successful project completion. So now we are bringing in logos because it's just logical that I've completed all these successful projects, therefore I deserve a raise. We also are bringing in a sense of ethos, right? We're explaining our credibility. We're using a word maybe like deserve to kind of persuade our boss or our reader into thinking along the same lines that we are, that we're deserving and that we've earned something. And then, of course, logos is a part of our persuasion as adults, too. So if you're thinking about how to be persuasive and you want to rely on some of your own kind of natural persuasive techniques, just think about times in your personal and professional life where you have wanted something and relied on skill, logic, and reasoning in order to get what you wanted. So, number one of our top 10 persuasive techniques is to be authoritative and establish credibility. And you're going to do this right off the bat in your opening for your proposal. So, this first bullet point here talks about qualifications, connections, research, and background. And these four items kind of go together and build upon one another. So, if you have relevant qualifications slash a connection to the topic that you're writing about, you want to use that in order to build credibility. So going back to the example, if you've identified a problem on campus, then it affects you as a student, and that buys you some credibility because you have firsthand experience with why this particular issue is a problem. Again, if you're writing to a boss, you are an employee. So again, you have firsthand experience with maybe how this problem is affecting customers or it's affecting organization on the floor, or maybe it's even affecting prices. So whatever your connection is to the topic, and I guess let me give a third example because another option you have is picking something that's related to your town or city. Maybe you're going to talk about something like filling in the potholes on a certain stretch of road. And again, you use this stretch of road every day. You've been a resident of this town for X amount of years and you participate in community activities. All of these things make you more credible and they buy you some credibility within the opening of your paper. So whatever your tie-in is, you want to emphasize that. What kinds of research can you include to strengthen your ideas? So in this case, research can mean a number of different things. Research might mean that you've looked up some statistics, and that could definitely be the case if you're writing something that's academic related or something related to your town. Research can also mean that you have looked at other companies or other towns or other schools that have experienced a similar problem in order to demonstrate that, hey, we're not alone in this. This is actually a bigger issue that lots of entities experience. So this is one way that you can bring research into your proposal because research is a required component of the assignment. And then background. So, what kind of background information is necessary to build credibility? This is another topic that's really tied into who your audience is. If you're writing to your boss, who's been your boss for a while, you probably don't need to include a whole lot of background. However, if you're writing to someone on the city council, you might need to include some background information to demonstrate that you've done your homework. So if you're going to talk about wanting to, I'll give another example, wanting to add lighting on a trail or a commonly used bike pathway or something because it gets too dark at night and the trail's not safe. You want to make sure A, that there aren't existing lights since the last time that you checked, and B, that it's even possible to go ahead and set up a lighting system within the area that you're talking about. So you've got to do a little bit of digging and show that you've done your homework and show that you know what you're talking about, essentially. So all of these things will happen at the beginning, but then you can also kind of pull them through, like your research is something that you'll pull through the entire proposal and touch back on. Tone is really important when you are being authoritative. We don't want to be this guy because he's really aggressive. He's in your face, he's pointing, and he's angry. We do, on the other hand, want to be more like this guy who is assertive rather than aggressive. So he's still portraying confidence. He's got a thumbs up sign, which means he's saying like, "Hey, come on, follow my idea. This is a great idea. Why don't you agree with me?" As opposed to the guy on the left, again, who is just saying, "You will agree with me. You have no option." So we don't want to be aggressive, but we do want to be assertive and confident. This means that you want to avoid phrases like "I believe," "I think," and "I feel" in your writing because those undermine your assertiveness and your confidence in what you're saying. Number two, use effective rhetorical questions. So, a rhetorical question is a question that's asked to get a specific response. You're not actually looking for an answer, and I'll give you some examples here. Rhetorical questions are really great ways to start off a paragraph or a specific section of your writing because they get the reader thinking. So, here's a few examples. Again, the purpose here is not to actually get an answer. You already know the answer. That's why you're asking the question. Would you like the company to make more money? Of course, the answer is yes. No one would say no to that question. So the idea is that by asking this question and knowing that the answer is yes, you're making the reader think, how are we going to make that happen? That sounds like something I'm really interested in. Another example, I'm going to look at the third one here, is how would you feel if the company had to let 10 people go? So that's kind of playing on the opposite end of the emotional spectrum. Instead of getting excited about making more money, now I'm kind of feeling bad, like, oh gosh, I don't want for the company to have to let people go. That would be something I want to avoid. Tell me how I can avoid that. So effective rhetorical questions are a really great persuasive technique. Again, you can use them to lead off a section, or you can build them into the middle of a paragraph. You can use them even as headings. So there's really no right or wrong place for them, but they do work really well. Don't overuse them. You don't want every paragraph to start with a question, and you don't want every heading to be a question either. Let's look at number 3, which is use repetition. I don't mean literally. You don't want to literally repeat sentences or phrases, but it is great to repeat key words and ideas, and that helps establish a theme. And we can see that in this example here. So it reads, I deserve an A on this assignment because of the hard work I've done. Over the past 2 weeks, I've spent countless hours researching and brainstorming. Even though I was initially confused, I reviewed the instructions and asked questions until I was on the right track. I believe my efforts have earned me an A. So in this case, you can see that I've underlined what words and ideas are repeating each other and you can see how they establish a theme within the paragraph. So first we have deserve up here in the first sentence and then earned down here in the last sentence. These sort of serve as bookmarks, like a beginning bookmark and an ending bookmark for the paragraph to start out by implying that we deserve something and then end by restating that we've really earned this. And then all the words underlined in the middle support those ideas. There's been hard work, countless hours, asking questions, and efforts made. So by really thinking about our word choices and making sure they tie in and connect to each other, we can establish that theme, which keeps the reader really on task with what we're trying to ask of them, and it reminds them constantly of what the main idea is. Number 4 goes along with number 3. You want to be consistent in your tone. So again, I already suggested that having an assertive tone is the best way to go, and you want that to happen all the way throughout the proposal. You also want to be consistent in your organization, and you can see I have macro and micro written there. Macro refers to the overall big picture organization of your proposal, which means that you want some consistency in the way that you're presenting your headings, the type of spacing that you're using, so it's a visual the consistency with your organization, bullet points, numbered lists, and things like that. And then the micro organization is your actual presentation of material. So you want to make sure that you're being logical and that you're really taking the reader through your proposal in a step-by-step way and being consistent with your content organization. And then theme is the one that really connects back to number 3. Be consistent with those word choices so that your reader never gets too far away from what your main idea is. Number 5 is offer reasons. So you don't want to stop at telling your reader what they should do. You have to also provide an explanation about why they should do it. So don't just say, approve this initiative. Say, approve this initiative because it's going to make a tangible change for everybody who's impacted. And then explain what that change is. And not just what the change is, but how it's going to play out in 1 month, 2 months, and 3 months. So it's really important to take those extra steps in order to show your reader what will happen. You don't want them to be left coming up with their own ideas of what will happen. Instead, it's much better for you to guide them in the direction that you want them to go. In other words, explain yourself. Number 6 is use comparisons. So this is especially relevant if you have a reader who might not fully understand what the problem is or what your solution is or why it's important. If they're a little bit too far removed from the problem and solution, then it's really great to use metaphors or similes or analogies just to help them connect. So in the example down below, it says happy employees are like kids on Halloween. They're motivated to work hard for their rewards. So a sentence like this might help a manager understand why you're suggesting implementing a reward system into a certain department. Because the manager might think, well, gosh, I mean, everybody is being paid really well for the work that they're doing. We already show appreciation in other ways. Why do we need to implement more rewards? Well, just think about kids on Halloween. It doesn't matter if it's rain or snow, they will work hard to go door to door and get that candy. And then that's a connection that brings a visual to mind and just makes it a little bit easier for the reader to understand what you're saying. On the right-hand side, I have a visual type of comparison, and you can definitely bring visuals into your work in this assignment and in anything else that we're going to do going forward in class. Visuals aren't often part of academic essays, but that's not what we do here. We're talking about real-world professional documents, and if you want to throw a picture in, you can throw a picture in. It needs to have purpose and reasoning. And a visual also needs to be placed well within the document. So that means that it should be not overwhelming the page. We wouldn't have a visual that takes up half of the page, for instance. A good rule of thumb is that your visual could take up about a quarter of the page. And you want the visual to be placed, obviously, near the content that it's relevant to. And another rule of thumb with using visuals within a professional document is that you always actually refer to the visual. So some part of your written text should call the visual out and say, you know, as seen in this picture over here to the right, and then you offer an explanation. So this example here with the man on the tightrope walking above the shark-infested waters, I think this could be useful for something like explaining that the man on the tightrope is a entrepreneur who is wanting to start his own business, but what he's got to be really careful of is keeping his balance and finding his place in the bigger world of the sharks, right? The well-established businesses and the retail chains that have already got their foot in the door. So as an entrepreneur, you've got to be careful you don't fall into that shark-infested water. You've got to walk the tight and narrow line while you're getting yourself established. So that's, again, just an example of how you might use a visual to make an analogy or a comparison. Let's move on to number 7. Agitate and solve. I really like this one. I think it's useful in almost every type of persuasive document. And what it means is that on the front end of your paper, so here in our case, while you're demonstrating or talking about the problem, you really kind of seek to irritate the reader or to get them emotionally stirred up and involved in the problem. So you make them really concerned, like, okay, this is a real problem, a real big issue. I'm embarrassed I hadn't thought about it before. And you kind of leave them at the edge of their seat, really waiting for you to solve the problem. So then on the back end, they're right where you want them. They're agitated about the problem. They really want a solution, and now you're delivering it on the back end. So again, it's really putting an emphasis on getting your reader emotionally invested and upsetting them to some extent, to help them see how big the problem actually is, and then turning around and being the hero by solving it in the back end of your paper. That's a persuasive technique to bring the reader along in the way that you want to bring them along. Number 8 of 10 is to predict the results. And this kind of goes along with an earlier one where I talked about explaining yourself. Make sure that you don't leave it up to the reader to decide what will happen if they do or do not go along with your idea. So you want to give your reader some idea of what to expect. You can use phrases like these. If you follow my recommendations, XYZ will happen, or if my recommendations are not taken into consideration, ABC will happen, right? So we can paint a positive rainbows and unicorns type of picture, or we can paint a more negative, like doom and gloom type of picture, and just really depends on the tone that you've used throughout the rest of your proposal and what you want to do, how you want to portray the idea, or what direction you want the reader thinking in. Number 9, this one's kind of just built into everything we do, but use the appeals, right? Don't forget to build in logic, emotion, and credibility all throughout your proposal. There's no proposal that shouldn't touch on at least each of these 3 appeals, at least once. The best writing always incorporates all 3 appeals. And number 10, our last persuasive writing technique, is to predict your reader's questions and objections. So this is something that happens at the very end of working on your assignment. So you've gotten everything written and you feel like it's in pretty good shape. Your job then is to give yourself some time and space, and depending on how much you've procrastinated, it could be maybe an hour or more ideally a day or 2 away from what you've written. Then you come back and you read your work thinking like your reader, and thinking like your reader is completely against everything you're saying. Like right from the first sentence, they hate the whole thing. They hate the idea. They don't think the problem's a problem. They just want to push back, and they are not interested at all in hearing what you have to say. So you want to read with ultimate skepticism. What this will do, it's hard to do it, but if you can get inside your head and do a read through that way, it should help you identify any objections or any lingering questions that the reader might have, because you don't want to leave those unanswered. So if you can poke holes in what you've written, that's great, because you haven't turned it in yet and you haven't given it to your reader yet, right? You poke those holes and then you fill them in. That's your kind of final step of revising and making sure the paper or the proposal is really polished and ready to be accepted by the reader. Again, the goal here is just to provide answers and solutions before your reader has a chance to object. So you want to anticipate questions that begin with phrases like, but what if we don't do this? Or, but what if we did it this way instead? I'm not sure about this particular idea, or I'm not sure about the cost of doing this. Or how will you make sure that this doesn't get out of hand? Or how will you make sure that the problem doesn't just simply reinvent itself in a couple of months from now? So again, looking for those skeptical types of questions that your reader might ask, and then going back in, filling in the holes, and making sure that they're answered. So let's take one final look here at the assignment requirements. You're going to include at least 2 sources. So these can be sources that you find online or in the online library. I gave you some ideas of the types of research that you might include at the very beginning of the meeting. Make sure that you're using in-text citations and that you have a reference page. We are using APA style in this class, so you should be following APA style guidelines. There's some information about that on the discussion board in case you have questions. This report, my suggestion is that it's about 4 full pages long. So this is by far the longest assignment that we've had. As I've said before, if you fall short by a page or half a page, or you go way over, that's completely fine. I just think that 4 pages is about what's needed, given that you're going to have this full explanation of the problem. You're going to be including several examples of the problem happening. Then you've got the solution. And of course, your solution should be including examples of how the problems that you gave samples of can be solved, right? So you want to complement those examples of the problem with follow-ups about, now see, if we do my idea, this is how that problem would not happen again, or how the problem could be improved upon the next time it occurs. And of course, you've got all the things that take up space, like your bullet points, your headings, your short paragraphs with spaces in between. You might choose to include a visual. So for all of these reasons, I think 4 pages is a really nice fit. And earlier I talked about visuals, I guess forgetting that you actually are required to have one original visual in this assignment. Now, this original visual is different because you can see in the orange circle, it says that it's created in Excel. So if you're going to use a picture like the one that I talked about with the entrepreneur on the tightrope over the shark infested waters, you can. And if that appeals to you and that is going to strengthen your overall assignment, definitely use it. However, that does not count as your one original visual because that would not be created in Excel. So the visual that you're going to create in Excel is going to be data driven, which means that some of the research that you do should include numbers. And don't worry too much about that particular part of the assignment as you're getting started this first week of the assignment, because we have 3 weeks on this unit. Next week, in our Tuesday meeting, I'm going to talk more about the original visual that you create in Excel, and I'm going to show you specifically how to create that visual in Excel, and then even how to put it into your Word document in the proper way. So like I said, don't worry too much about that this first week. Focus more on picking your topic and getting started with brainstorming ideas for the content. Just like everything else we do in the blue circle here, you want your work to be single spaced and left aligned. Of course, headings and subheadings and all that good stuff. And don't forget short, concise paragraphs. There is a sample proposal for you to take a look at, and that's in the unit's ratings. So make sure you check that out. It's not by any means a perfect assignment, but it does most of what it needs to do. And it's just a really good example. Like if you're kind of feeling overwhelmed or you're not sure about a topic or how to organize things, this is a great place for you to look and kind of maybe it will help you get refocused on what the main idea for the assignment is. And of course, let me know if you have questions once you've taken a look at that sample proposal. So before we get into the due dates, as I said in the beginning of the meeting, there's also a PowerPoint that goes along with this assignment. And I will talk extensively about PowerPoints in next Tuesday's meeting as well. So I'm going to cover the visuals that you create in Excel as well as PowerPoints next Tuesday. So this week, your focus should be, again, on topics, generating ideas, and starting to actually get the written proposal written. And then next week, you should have some solid writing done. Not that you'll necessarily be finished, but you should have a good couple of pages worth of ideas and kind of have things organized in the way you want them. And then you can start to work on translating that into your PowerPoint. So our due dates that are coming up are the topic approval, which is due on February 25th. Once you submit that, I'm going to respond right back and let you know, like, yes, your topic is approved, or no, it's not, and here's why, and maybe here's a better idea that's close to what you wanted to do. The sooner you turn it in, the sooner I'll get you the feedback, and the sooner you can get started working. I strongly encourage you not to start working until you get approval back, because there's always topics that I get that don't work for some reason or another. And I never want anyone to get started doing actual work and then not being able to use it. So again, the sooner the better for your topic approvals. Your final assignments, meaning the written proposal as well as the PowerPoint, are due on March the 7th. And then the week of March 8th is when we'll be having small group meetings where you're going to be presenting your PowerPoint in a Zoom presentation, because that's an important skill in today's world, to be able to present something on screen. If you have any questions, as normal, go ahead and shoot me an email, and you can always ask questions on the discussion board too. Thank you guys for coming, and I hope you have a great day.